So the next thing we want to do is actually create an explosion when this bullet actually hits an object. We want to make some sort of explosion, special effects, so that's kind of exciting every time we hit it. We get a little payback, a little bit of reward for getting rid of these asteroids coming in, trying to kill us as we're flying around. So let's go in, and we're going to do this inside of our own trigger because this is the event that happens. We have that collision, we respawn the position of something, and then we're also going to be exploding something at the same time. So we're going to say let's create the explosional impact. So this kind of sets us up for what are we going to do. We're going to create the explosional impact, and we're going to do that by using our instantiate. So we have our instantiate function. Now how does that work again? If you've forgotten, then just always try to remember that word, because as long as you know that word or something close to, then you can always find that in your API for your search. Then you go back to it and say, oh, okay, that's how that function works. That's what it does. There's my examples of how to plug that into it. So for us, we want to be able to do, again, we're getting our object, we're getting the position and the rotation of how we want to create that object that we bring in. So if we look up here, we've got what and what. We've got our instantiate what. We're going to instantiate the explosion. And inside of Unity in our project, we look through here and we say, okay, what prefab? There we go, prefab explosion. That's what we want to pull into it. So we need a variable. Let's go in and add an additional variable to our bullet. We're going to say a variable explosion. That's going to be a transform. And if we go back down, we can say, okay, great. If it's going to be an explosion here, we're going to instantiate the explosion where we can just instantiate it from our object's current transform position and transform rotations. We'll say our transform dot position, comma, our transform dot rotation. So nice and simple and straightforward. We're just taking it, the position and the rotation of that bullet object when it hits, and we're going to instantiate that explosion object. So we'll go ahead and hit save on the script file. We're going to go back into Unity. We're going to go to our prefab bullet, because the one thing we need to do now is actually load something into the explosion variable that we brought open, and that's just going to be our prefab here. We'll just drag and drop that over into our explosion option, and we'll hit save. We'll hit play. And now as we go through, there we go. As that bullet hits an object, it destroys it, it plays the explosion animation, and it makes it look nice and exciting. Now the one thing you'll notice is that when we shoot, that bullet goes all the way through. That's great if this is like a super special bullet that cannot be destroyed, but generally we want to get rid of that bullet when it hits an object. So while we're on it, we've created the explosion, we've reset the position. The last thing we want to do is actually just get rid of the bullet. So let's get rid of the bullet. And to get rid of the bullet, again, we're just doing what? We're just simply destroying the game object right in here. So let's just copy this line. And if you're writing this for the second time, definitely write that line in, type in destroy, type in the game object. This gets you very comfortable with the syntax, gets you comfortable with the words that are used, so that you start to memorize these, so that you can just call them up when you want to use them, instead of constantly having to go back to the API or back to other scripts to figure out, okay, what was that I was doing? We just simply want to be able to get those memorized and get comfortable with those words. So here again, we're just simply getting rid of the bullets. We're going to destroy the game object. Now, the one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to put this for instance above. Let's kind of do a test here. Let's say we do it like this. We hit play. We go in. We notice that the object gets destroyed. Our explosion happens just right. But let's say we changed up the order in which some of this happens. Let's say that we thought, let's destroy our game object. So we're going to put that, let's say, at the top up here. We'll hit save. We'll go back into Unity. We'll hit play. And let's kind of find an object. Now when we hit it, we can destroy it and get it doing just what we want it to do. Nice little explosion. We can even take this and set it in different positions. It reads it, it runs through it. So at the end of the day, we're in good shape in a number of different ways that we can structure it. Alright, let's go ahead and look a second at this script and make sure that have we got it to the point that it's complete. Do we have everything we need in here? If we're looking at it, we're able to do what? We can move the object. We get rid of the object after a certain point. If we hit something inside of our game world, we check for the tag of the object. If it's a tag that we recognize, then we actually reset that object that we collide with. And we also create that explosion to make it look like we have destroyed that object. And then at the end of all that, we get rid of our bullet and clean up the object. So here, we're doing really good. The one thing we haven't done is we haven't actually checked for if we have objects loaded inside the inspector. So if we go back over to our inspector, we can see that we have, explosion, we've got a prefab loaded. Well, if we didn't have the prefab loaded, we can go ahead and unload this object. Let's say we select on none. And now let's play this. Now if we play this, and let's shoot our object, it gets rid of everything. But it also says we don't have something assigned, and that's because we're not actually checking for if we have something assigned, use this or don't use this. So if we go back to our script and we say, well, on our explosion, we're instantiating explosion that we haven't checked to find out, do we have anything loaded? So we could go in and do a couple of little checks first. Let's say we do if, and if what? If explosion. And we could just do if explosion, because we're saying if the explosion is true, if we do have an object loaded, then instantiate the object. And that way, if we don't have anything loaded, we just continue on down. So we'll save that one. We'll hit play. And this time around, if we can get to our little bad guy here, you can see that we don't play the explosion. And it doesn't give us any kind of error message because we've actually checked for that object being loaded. So whenever you're working with loading up assets inside of the inspector, the one thing you want to make sure you're doing is checking that that object has been loaded in the inspector. And if it hasn't, then don't play that object, and that way we don't have to worry about getting any kind of unsightly error messages in our console. Okay, and that's going to just about wrap it up for our bullet script. We might have to come back to it and touch up here and there, but for the most part we're looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and move on to our player script after this and set up a couple of events with it.